Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Hello, everyone. Today in the studio, we have with us Kim Coots. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Kim, you're an evidential medium, grief coach, spiritual healer, and honestly, that's just a few of the things that you do. You truly have had quite a spiritual journey.
I have.
Yes, you have. I really want to spend time talking today about a topic that I feel is extremely, extremely important, and honestly may be kept in the closet more than the topic of spirituality, honestly, and that's dealing with loss and understanding and managing grief. Before we delve into that subject, I would love to hear a bit about how you moved from being a Leadership 500 Award winner for Leadership Excellence in what I feel is the intense business world. I did a little bit of corporate myself, into a life that is totally immersed with spirit.
Yeah, thank you. It has been an interesting journey for me. My public career has been in the business world as a either president or COO of companies, or a business consultant, consulting CEOs of companies. That's been like what the public would know me as. But in the background, I was always interested in spiritual healing. I had a lot of trauma growing up and really resonated with spiritual healing to work through my trauma. And in that self-work of spiritual healing, I received all these certifications, not necessarily to use them for other people, but as a part of my own healing process. And I started my own little spiritual healing practices that I kept in the closet and really on the down low so that it didn't impact my business career. Because in my mind, and it actually happened one time where a corporate client found my spiritual healing website and texted me and said, "What is this?" And that freaked me out. So I kind of lived two different lives. The spiritual healing space is really where I felt called and fulfilled, but I had just built this really successful persona and career, and it was difficult for me to bridge those together or just go with the spiritual healing side. That's kind of the background to it. So in the background, being a spiritual healer for over 20 years, and then evidential mediumship isn't something, or mediumship in general, which is the ability to communicate with those who have transitioned to the other side, or in what society's terms, dies. I was always kind of felt uncomfortable about it. It wasn't a topic that I was interested in or felt comfortable about, and just avoided it altogether, even though I'm a very spiritual person. And I think that was primarily probably because of the only interaction or awareness I had of mediums was from Hollywood horror movies or what I saw on TV. And it was just a topic I was like, I'm going to avoid that one altogether. And then I had a personal tragedy happen. I experienced the unexpected death of my only child. And 3 weeks later, the unexpected death of my mother. So I had two very, very significant losses in the same month. I was willing, I wanted nothing more than to have a connection with my daughter on the other side. That's really what set me on this quest to find out, is there life after death? Can I have this connection? What is mediumship? And really opening up to explore it. And I was so skeptical of it. But I kept receiving these really powerful signs from my daughter on the other side. And in my heart, I knew they were her, but my mind was doubting it and saying, am I making this up because I'm so desperate and want to have this connection? Is this real? So that skepticism really propelled me down this path of researching and learning everything I could about mediumship and what's called ADC, or after-death communication. From there, I started taking all these trainings. I discovered evidential mediumship, which I had never heard of. But evidential mediumship is where the medium, the person who can communicate with loved ones on the other side, brings forth evidential information that there's no way they could have known about to share with a living loved one, to really validate who the connection is with. And that was exactly what I was looking for, because I wanted some kind of proof. And in studying evidential mediumship, just for the purpose of having that connection with my daughter, I had to do readings for other people. And I said, I'm not going to be a medium. I don't want to do readings for other people. I just want this for myself. But what happened was I discovered how healing it is and how I could connect with the loved ones for other people. That shifted my whole perspective and outlook. It took me a while to have the courage to come out of the closet with that, but that's really kind of how I got on this journey and became and am what I am today, which is an evidential medium.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I had never heard that term evidential medium before, so sort of curious what was different, because as I've talked to people, I didn't honestly realize that there were multiple different kinds of mediumship out there. I've had my own personal experiences in working with mediums and have some friends in my life that are mediums. It is amazing to me the two things that you bring forth with your work. Number one is that we're way more than this and that there's way more out there. The other is the incredible healing that it brings, the ability to close loops that were left over, just so many different things. And I think we'll get into that a little bit. But I love when you said that you come out of the closet, the spiritual closet. So how long have you been doing this? Like, how long did it take for you to actually say, it's time for me to step forward on this other path?
Well, it naturally unfolded, even though I had my heels like in the dirt. Universe has a way of bringing it out. So it actually came out because I was doing a business podcast. I was being interviewed by an entrepreneurial podcast on the business side. There were two hosts. The other co-host was looking at my info, and my mediumship website came up, and I could see his face go, oh my gosh. And that's kind of how it, in my business community, everybody, like all of my clients are referrals. So everyone knows everybody. So as soon as one person found out, it kind of got out there. So that's really how it wasn't because I said, I'm going to tell everyone this is what I'm doing. I just started putting it out there, not hiding it anymore. And then on the business side, that's kind of how it came out that way. This has been my journey for 25 years on the putting it out there, keeping it small, putting it out there, keeping it small. But over the last several years is really when I said it's time for me to own this. And that really came from this tragedy to say, you never know how much time you have here. If you're called to do this, it's time to do it. And I knew that this was my calling.
Nice. I love it. And it's a story that I've repeatedly heard where people have very successful careers in other industries, businesses, licenses that they have. And they've had concerns if someone finds out about their spiritual work that it could affect their business life or it could affect a license that they held. And I've heard so many interesting stories about how, as spirit has it, spirit will keep pushing until you get on the path that you need to get on, how it sort of comes out and how they came out of the closet and things merged together in their own way. And the people who were supposed to be in their lives stayed in their lives, and the people who weren't didn't. I do want to switch over. I would love to talk about, and I've been trying to get someone on the show to talk about this topic, honestly, for quite a while, because I think it is so absolutely important. And for whatever reason, I feel we're seeing more and more of it in our society, at least over here in the States. I think that there's some things in Europe. We do have a global footprint with the show, so I can speak to what I've been experiencing with people over here, and that is a lot of loss, and a lot of loss of young people, and a lot of loss of unexpected people leaving the earth young. So I will say globally, I'm sure it was everywhere, especially with COVID, but this is beyond the COVID situation. And what I find is there's such consuming grief out there. There are grief groups. I have a friend who is a facilitator of a grief loss group who's been dealing with her own grief and really realized, and she leads a group of people who had lost children. And what she realized was they do good work, but it's not enough. And she's really searching and looking for more. And then we've come across each other, and I was like, thank you, Spirit. This is such an important topic, and people are so consumed with their grief. The folks that I've interacted with feel so isolated and alone because they feel like they just can't talk about it. No one understands. They share things that people say to them, which devastating, and I'm sure the other person's well-meaning. It's almost like you can write a book on what to say and what not to say, and people's uncomfortablenesses with these conversations. I'm going to let you pick this up. I can't even imagine what you've gone through, so truly my heart goes out with your journey with that, what you've learned, and tools that have been helpful for you. And there's just so many people out there, and I know your story is just going to touch so many hearts.
Yeah, and there's so much I want to share on this. So, like, my mind is going a million miles a minute, but I just want to pause for a moment to say, really, one of the things that pushed me forward on this path was because I could have just kept this to myself and said, I just have a connection with my daughter, and that's where I'm going to stay. One of my colleagues lost her husband, and she committed suicide. And in my heart, I said, oh my gosh, if she would have known what I know, if she would have had the tools I have, the spiritual healing tools, if she would have known what I know about our loved ones still being with us, if she would have had this different perspective, would she have made a different decision? Because the grief can feel so dark. I know from my personal experience. So I wanted to start with sharing that. That is really what I hate to see in the world is people struggling with grief so much that they give up on their life. And it does not have to be that way. In my own experience with grief, and I first want to say, in 2018, I quit my corporate job for some reason. It was just stressful. I was like, I'm done. And I became a grief coach. I took 4 months between my corporate careers, became a grief coach. And at the end of it, this was prior to any of the deaths that I've experienced, I said, I can't relate to people who have lost someone. I can't do this work. So I just, because kind of like, wow, that's weird that I felt called to do that, because I was really passionate about it. So when I had my experience with the unexpected loss of my daughter, which she transitioned from a drug overdose by taking a drug that she didn't know had fentanyl in it, which is a really common thing that's occurring on the planet. Is so many people, especially our youth, are transitioning back to spirit because they're taking drugs that they don't know have fentanyl in it. All kinds of drugs, even, pills that you wouldn't even think about. I mean, it's an epidemic, and it's not talked about enough, in my opinion.
That's a whole nother show I would love to do, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's so much of that happening. And when my daughter died, the grief was so overwhelming to me. I can't even put it into words. Like, she's my life. So in that unexpected passing, yes, I pulled on the tools that I learned from as a grief coach to learn, and that helped me realize part of why I did that. I just wasn't aware of how it was going to come into play, and that was helpful. And then I said to myself, if I could just have a connection with her and know that she's okay, because for people who have a more traumatic death, whether it's an overdose, a suicide, something more traumatic, I think what I find common with the people that I work with is they're thinking, is my loved one okay? Did they make it okay? Are they okay where they're at? There's so many different beliefs out there, and so many people saying things about it, that in itself can make grief so much harder. So I know I'm kind of all over the place. Let me know if I'm going in too many directions, but I'm so passionate about this because I know what it's like to be in those shoes of the fear, wondering if my loved one's okay. Yeah. But I want to pause there to say, as an evidential medium, I connect a lot with people on the other side who have died of overdoses, who have died from suicide, and death is not the end. When we, in society, we think of death as being the end, and part of grief feels like death is the barrier to being with our loved one anymore. And that's not true. Our loved ones really are still with us. They do exist on the other side. They just don't have a body anymore. So the death is the death of the body, not of the spirit. And most of us in society aren't raised that way. So it's a whole different perspective and a shift in perspective to have. But I first want to say that. And I also want to share that with the beautiful spirits that I connect with who have transitioned from an overdose, from suicide, from a traumatic death, they're in a good place. They are doing well. So there's this perspective of what is life like for them on the other side. The cause of death doesn't determine that. So I just want to share that for anybody who's worrying or thinking that automatically their loved one is going through some kind of bad experience on the other side because of the way they died. I want to put that out there right now. In my experience and the spirits that I've connected with and brought forth evidence to their living loved ones, I can say without a doubt that reassurance.
Beautiful and important.
Yeah. I will also say, when I said, if I could just have that connection with my daughter, I can do this. I then had that connection with her, but I still struggled with grief. The grief was so dark for me. My daughter's my soulmate, so it's difficult not to have her physical presence here in my life. And it shifted. My greatest purpose was being a mother. I expected to be a grandmother. Like I had all of these expectations in my life. And when that relationship changed, because my relationship with her isn't over, it's just different. It brought up so many things, so many questions for me, like who am I? Why am I here? What am I going to do with my life? And I struggled with that grief. So I reached out to the common grief support options out there, like grief support groups. Finally taking medication, even though I didn't want to, but I needed some support. Seeing psychologists, all of those kind of traditional things that we know of. And either they did little to help me or some of them actually made things worse. So I wasn't finding what I needed in those traditional methods. And something made me say, I got onto the spiritual healing path to help with the trauma of my childhood, but also to heal the corporate burnout I had. Back in 2012, I went through a period of depression and anxiety over changing my corporate job, but I was still in the corporate world. And what I had done was I'd left a corporate job, started my own spiritual practice, left that and went back to the corporate world. And having depression and anxiety, I utilized the spiritual healing tools that I had practiced for many years. So in my journey with grief, I wondered, can I use that to help me? And what I found was society may not know how to support the grieving, but spirit does. There are spiritual healing tools that have been so profound and helpful for me on my own journey and what I help other people with who are struggling with grief too. So that is another path to consider for people on the spiritual healing side.
Can you expand a little bit on those spiritual tools?
Sure. So some of these spiritual healing practices that I use and that I also offer are energy healing. So some people might know of that as Reiki, but helping to balance the energy field. So energy work is a piece of that. I also have found immense healing in, I don't know if you've ever heard of shamans, but they're like the medicine men and women. Probably medicine men and women are probably more commonly referred to, but shamans have been around and practicing healing work for over 60,000 years. And one of their healing practices is called journeying, where you're shifting your consciousness to journey to spirit. So you're connecting with spirit, working with angels, guides, teachers to help with healing, to help with guidance. The spirit journeying or shamanic healing journeys have been so profound for me and for my clients. There's other tools within that as well. Something called soul retrieval is a healing practice that the shamans use. And that is around the basis of, in this healing work, everything starts from a soul level. So by working on the soul level, healing from a soul level, that impacts the emotional, physical, and mental levels. And when you go through a trauma, like the death of a loved one, our souls have a way of breaking off little pieces to help us cope with that. But in that breaking off of that energy to allow us to cope with that does impact us over time, where we don't quite feel whole or we feel like something's missing. So the soul retrieval process is about helping to restore all of that energy to you, and in a very healing way. The word shamanic, I know when I first heard that word back in like 2010, I was like, what is that word? That sounds like a scary word. So that's the experience that people have when they hear that word. That's how I felt about it. But it's really, what it means is it's a practice that shamans or medicine men and women have used for over 60,000 years. That is just another way of connecting with spirit and for spirit to provide the guidance and healing for you in your own way. It's not a religion.
I saw that the people that you studied with are people that I have followed myself in some of their work, and it's very powerful. I was curious about what you were going to say because you studied with Alberto Volato. I'm not sure if I say his name right. I know there's another fellow who's come up with someone else that I worked with, Dana Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really search for it. And I think with the shamanism, it's something that is just coming more to the forefront. You're right. These practices have been around forever. They're like the original indigenous way of doing things. And for me, it just feeds my soul that we're finally getting back to these methods again.
Yeah, and it's a method that has been used worldwide across all cultures, whether it's Celtic, Egyptian, South American. They all have at the center the core techniques, and each culture might have different things that they do with them. But this has been around for 60,000 years worldwide, used by cultures all over the world. What I love about it so much is it's not a system where there's a set of beliefs that you have to go believe in. It's a set of practices and tools that you use, and spirit works with you in your own way.
That's really important, that it's unique and individual, but with a consistent methodology, we'll say, that goes with it. So I see that you also studied astrology. Now, was that something that you did for yourself personally, or do you integrate that into some of your work?
Well, I started out being interested in it personally because I had several business colleagues, and they were raving about this astrologist, and they're CEOs of companies. I don't often hear male CEOs talking about this wonderful astrologer who's helping them with their life and business direction. So I was curious, learned about her, and her name is Deborah Silverman, and she's a psychologist, which I love psychology and figuring out how the mind works. I was interested in learning. She's a psychologist and a world-renowned astrologist. And she had a course. So I'm like, I'm going to take that because I really want to learn about me. This was prior to my daughter's transition, actually just a few months before her transition. And I said, I really want to learn more about me and my path and, why I hide these spiritual gifts. I took her first level, and I loved it so much that I completed all of them, all of her levels to be a professional astrologer. I was lucky to be able to give my daughter, she was my test student. I did her chart reading as my test and learned so much about her. My daughter's name is Kira. I learned so much about Kira, and it was such a gift to be able to have that connection and interaction with her before she transitioned because I learned so much about her. Now I use astrology as a tool to help people learn about themselves, to learn, what is my soul here for? What is my purpose? What are my challenges? I look at astrology as, Deborah will say, it's a permission slip to be who you are. And it's very validating when someone can read your birth chart and tell you about you. My birth chart, funny enough, when I had my reading done by a teacher before Kira transitioned, she said, "You're a medium in my birth chart." And I said, "No, I'm not interested in that." And she said, "I'm going to give you the name of a woman in case you change your mind." Well, a few months later, when Kira went home to spirit, I reached out to that woman. I said, "Okay, this is what's happened, and I want to learn." I use astrology as a tool to help other people really get in touch with themselves, especially after a significant change. If the loved one who's transitioned is a significant part of their life where it might affect their purpose or their meaning in their life or their sense of security, understanding your birth chart can really help you on your path and make decisions in your life.
Well, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and you've really hit them from a lot of different directions. I love how you studied so many different things and that you're weaving them all together for the same purpose. I also saw that you, and I have to remember the name of the place, that you became an ordained minister.
It is the seminary for spiritual peacemaking. Yes.
That's what it was. And I thought the seminary for spiritual peacemaking, like just that title in itself it just spoke to me. And I thought this sounds really cool. And then I had to laugh because I saw that you studied with James Wyman,
yes,
who I actually met when I was on a trip to Egypt. I went on, he's definitely a fascinating fellow, and it was neat meeting him. And I thought, you have to love it. They talk about about the 7 degrees of separation with things. Now, I didn't know that he was doing this ordination, and I thought, that's interesting. The name sounded familiar, so I looked him up in his picture, and I'm like, yep, definitely the same fella.
Yeah, that was years ago. I want to say it was like in 2006, maybe, I became ordained, and that was really more, I went through the seminary more for my own spiritual seeking, because at that point in my life, I was like, what am I? I've never been a religion. Am I this? Am I that? So I was studying all of these different religions to figure out what I am. I realized from all of these different religions that there's things I resonated with and things I didn't. The Seminary for Spiritual Peacemaking is all about embracing all religions and all spiritual paths as one hand on the hand of God. And I really resonated with that, because it's not saying you have to be one certain thing, because I can identify with parts of all of them and also things that I don't resonate in all of them. So that's what led me there. The ordination was part of the program, but I didn't do it specifically for that. But that journey did lead me on to officiating funerals, which I hadn't planned on. I officiated my daughter's funeral as well. And it's interesting how all of these pieces along my life path have led me to this work today over time.
Wow. That is an amazing journey. Like, I knew that you had a crazy spiritual journey, but I did not realize how intense and all the different elements and small pieces that went together with that.
Yeah, I also had it was in 8th grade in my creative writing class. I wrote a poem about transitioning, like on dying, on going into the light. And I won a literary award for it. And I was probably 13 back then. No idea where that poem came from for me. But that was kind of, I think, the beginning of my path with what we call death.
Fascinating. I'm not a fan of the word death. I certainly have used it a lot in my career with people, but it's transitioning. And interestingly enough, even those that I would say are not consciously aware of their spirituality or on the journey, in mainstream, I'm hearing the term transitioned or transitioning used a lot more, even in the healthcare world with it. So that's a beautiful thing, and it's a shift, and it's all these small steps that are just going to continue to move us as individuals as well as a society and humanity into this bigger shift in this connection. I absolutely, appreciate all the work that you're doing with this. If someone wanted to work with you, Kim, how would they get a hold of you? And what are some of the main modalities that you're putting out there these days?
Well, my website, kimcoots.com, it's KIMCOOTS.com, has all of that information. The model that I work with is in 3 parts. First part is grief support. I know, going back to what you said earlier, how lonely it can feel. Society has its own way of seeing grief that is very different for those who are grieving. So the grief support piece, I offer spiritual healing opportunities around that, some coaching around that. And then the second part of that model is connecting with spirit, connecting with your loved ones. So I do evidential mediumship readings to help you connect with your loved ones. And the third part of that is really learning how to live after you've gone through that experience, determining what you want for your life and working through that. In that, I offer astrology readings and coaching on where to go from here. My website has all the information on that if anyone is interested, as well as some free resources there for people.
You just touched on a subject that we didn't specifically touch on, and that's learning how to live after an event like this. What would you say to folks out there who really feel like that they're truly stuck and hurting and they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, and I think that is probably one of the biggest, hardest questions that we have after experiencing a loved one transition is, how do I live after this? To me, it's really an inner journey. We tend to look outside of ourselves, just in general in life for many things, but it's being very compassionate with yourself, especially if there is a lack of closure with that loved one. I highly recommend getting an evidential mediumship reading because it is so healing. And this is a journey. To answer that question, there's not one answer. What I would want you to know, though, is that this is a journey. Grief can be a downward spiral into darkness and self-destruction, or it can be a doorway to spiritual awakening. And it's your perspective that determines that, not any length of time, not anything you do. I mean, to me, I'm going to be grieving my daughter's physical presence not being here for the rest of my life. So grief may not ever go away, but your perspective of it can shift, and that changes the nature of your grief. I can say from someone who we didn't even go touch on my health journey with grief, like my grief really impacted my physical health significantly. What I would want you to know is you can find the magic and meaning in life again, even though you're grieving and your loved ones want that for you. It is a journey. It is really looking at what you need. And if you're open to this, to grief being a doorway to spiritual awakening, I believe that the people, the resources that you need to do that will show up in your life. And it may be hearing this interview. But that's what it was for me. Is it's a personal journey, but just know that there are other options besides the traditional grief support methods out there. Do what resonates with you. Surround yourself with people who, even if it's a small group of people, I lost so many relationships after my daughter transitioned because people just didn't know what to say to me or how to work with that. So I know it's lonely, but spirit, shamanic healing work gives you a sense of being supported and held by spirit. Working with a shamanic healing practitioner is very encouraging. And then surrounding yourself with people who also on the same journey, but do know that they have a purpose here and want to fulfill that. And you too, whoever's listening to this, have a purpose here.
Thank you so much for your transparency. And you truly you've shared every bit of your inner soul and self with this. And I know that takes a lot of courage and isn't always easy, as much as it can be very fulfilling. I will say on your website, there is a beautiful picture of you and Kara. She's a beautiful young lady, and I saw the two of you together. When I looked at that picture, it made me smile.
Thank you.
And I do want to also thank you for all the work that you're doing. It is so important, and it's making such a difference. I honestly don't know if there is anyone out there that has not had someone in their life, whether friend, coworker, family, that's life has not been touched by these overdoses. For all our listeners out there, I always appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to us. Until next time, remember, embrace that wild soul. Have a great day. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wild Soul Gatherings Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. To learn more about our guests, please go to our website, wildsoulsgathering.com. We're very eager to hear from our listeners what you thought of the episode, topics you might like us to cover in the future, your thoughts on spirituality, questions you may have. Please feel free to send us an email at wildsoulsgathering@gmail.com. This is your host, Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love. Until we meet again, embrace your wild soul.